energy on set was incredible. I didn't actually work with any stuntmen on the set.
We would love to. We just need the leads. So anybody out there, if you've got any leads for us, you can email us, you can call us.
On screen, American Pickers looked like a dream job. Two buddies chasing hidden treasures, sharing laughs, and making deals in dusty barns.
I've still got that. You need to buy that.
I need to buy that.
But behind those road trips and smiles was a very different story. One Mike Wolfe kept quiet for years. Now, he's finally opening up. And it's not just about tough negotiations or long shooting days. It's about the 5 people who made working on the show almost impossible. People who turned something he loved into something heavy. This isn't gossip. It's the truth from the man who built the brand and lived through the drama. So who were the ones that pushed Mike to the edge and made him finally speak up after all this time? 1. Frank Fritz. You know what hurts more than a business falling apart? A friendship breaking right along with it. And for Mike Wolfe, that heartbreak had a name. Frank Fritz. For over a decade, they were the faces of American Pickers. Mike and Frank.
A family-owned business in Peoria is going national to the History Channel, featured on the popular TV show American Pickers.
2 guys in a rusty white van, rolling through back roads and forgotten towns, picking through barns, old garages, and dusty attics in search of American history. Sure, they found oil cans, vintage motorcycles, and neon signs, but the real treasure was always the banter, the inside jokes, the oddball energy that made you feel like you were just riding along with 2 old friends chasing stories.
And so everybody I worked with was very close to Frank.
But behind the scenes, something was unraveling. It wasn't sudden. It didn't blow up on camera. It was quieter than that, and in some ways, much sadder. Before they were on TV, before the History Channel gave them a shot, Mike and Frank had already been picking together for years. Since the late 1980s, actually. They were just 2 guys from Iowa, bonded over their love for antiques, motorcycles.
And I went to bigger motorcycles. I've been into that my whole life. And when I was a little kid, I started collecting staples.
And the thrill of the hunt. That kind of history doesn't come easily. You don't build that sort of brotherhood overnight, which made what happened next even harder to watch. In early 2020, Frank vanished from the show. No send-off, no mention, just gone. Fans noticed immediately. Was it health-related? A break? A contract dispute? There were questions, but not many answers. And at first, it made sense. Frank had long battled Crohn's disease, a painful condition he'd lived with for years. Around that time, he also had major back surgery and was focusing on recovery. He later shared he'd dropped over 60 pounds, quit drinking, and was trying to take better care of himself. He said he wanted to come back. He was ready. But then, silence. In 2021, Frank finally spoke out, and his words stung. "I haven't talked to Mike in 2 years," he said in an interview. "He didn't even call after my surgery. That's just how it is. No messages, no visits, no check-ins. For someone you once called a brother, that silence felt like betrayal." Fans were floored. Was Mike ghosting him? Was Frank being difficult? Nobody really knew what went down behind closed doors. But what we did know was this: the show kept rolling. And with Frank out, new faces rolled in. Viewers saw Mike introduce fresh pickers, like Jersey John, and slowly it became clear. Frank wasn't on a break. He'd been quietly pushed out. Mike stayed mostly quiet. No interviews, no drama, just polite, vague statements. And that silence.
So I wouldn't be standing here today if he wasn't standing with me for 15 years almost on the show.
It only made the whole thing feel colder. Then, in July 2022, everything changed. Frank suffered a major stroke. Suddenly, the tension didn't matter anymore. Mike broke the silence and posted a message, saying he was praying for Frank and that he still cared about him. For a moment, Fans hoped this tragedy might bring them back together, but it never did. In early 2024, Frank Fritz passed away, and just like that, the door on their friendship closed for good. The loss hit hard, not just for Mike, but for millions of viewers who felt like they'd lost a friend too. Frank wasn't flashy. He wasn't trying to be a celebrity. He was real. The kind of guy who'd walk into a cluttered shed and get genuinely excited about a dusty old gas pump. He cracked corny jokes. He grumbled when things got too expensive. He bargained like your dad at a yard sale. And that made people love him. After Frank's death, Mike finally opened up more, and you could hear the regret in his voice. He said he'd always hoped they'd sit down again someday, talk things through, maybe grab a drink and laugh about the old days. But that day never came. There would be no American Pickers without Frank Fritz, Mike said, and that wasn't a PR line. That was grief. That was honesty. Their falling out wasn't explosive. There were no lawsuits, no screaming matches. It was quieter than that. Just two old friends drifting apart. And by the time one of them wanted to fix it, it was already too late. To Mike Wolfe, the next betrayal, however, didn't come from a rival or a network executive. It came from someone sitting at the family table. Someone who should have had Mike's back, his own little brother, Mike Wolfe. Now, if you watched the later seasons of American Pickers, you probably saw it unfold in real time. After Frank's sudden disappearance, Robbie stepped into the spotlight. At first, it looked like a classic family move, Mike bringing in his younger brother to help keep things afloat. It had potential. The two Wolfe brothers hit the road together, chasing treasures and carrying on the legacy. In theory, that sounds like gold. But in practice, it didn't take long for the cracks to show. From the jump, Robbie's energy was different. Where Frank had been relaxed, witty, and genuinely curious about people's stories, Robbie brought a sharper edge. He was loud, aggressive, and came across like he was more interested in flipping inventory than honoring the past. Some fans said it felt like watching a used car salesman who wandered onto the wrong set. Others weren't so polite. On Reddit, fan reactions snowballed fast. One post that caught serious traction read, "Robbie acts like he's running a pawn shop on Fast Forward. No heart, just hustle." That line stuck with people. It summed up exactly what viewers felt had changed. Not just with Robbie, but with the entire soul of the show. And then there were the specific moments. Fans pointed out scenes where Robbie lowballed older collectors even when they seemed unsure or emotionally attached to the item. One particularly painful clip showed a woman hesitating to part with her grandfather's antique clock. She was clearly torn. It meant something to her. And yet, Robbie just smiled, leaned in, and pushed the deal anyway. That moment left a bitter taste. Because American Pickers was never supposed to be about pressure, it was about preservation of stories, of memories, of dignity. And all of a sudden, it seemed like those principles were slipping away. Fans were not the only ones who were worried. Rumors began to circulate that some parts of the show were more staged and scripted. Producers are prompting sellers. Deals are being made. Emotions are being manufactured. The old authenticity, the thing that made people fall in love with Mike and Frank's road trips, started to feel like a memory. Sure, reality TV has always blurred the line between real and performance, but with Robbie in the mix, it felt like the scale tipped too far. To be fair, none of this was officially confirmed. But when multiple fan communities, across forums and socials, all start echoing the same complaints, that the show lost its heart the minute Robbie came in, well, that kind of smoke usually means fire. But what really threw gasoline on the flame was Mike's silence. He didn't defend Robbie, but he didn't call him out either. Not publicly, not even subtly. And for many loyal fans, that silence said it all. It looked like Mike was choosing the brand over the bond, or worse, choosing blood over everything else, including the audience that had been riding with him for over a decade. One post that went viral summed it up best. Mike used to feel like one of us. Now he just feels like the boss of a show he barely believes in. And here's the tough part. Everyone wants to believe that family always sticks together, that bringing in your brother means loyalty and trust. But what happened here? It was the complete opposite. Robbie wasn't preserving the legacy. He was cashing in on it. Can you imagine that? The show went from a heartfelt journey about forgotten stories to what some fans described as vintage flipping with a corporate filter. Cold, fast, and overly polished. And the damage wasn't just to the audience connection. It hurt behind the scenes, too. Some insiders claimed crew morale dropped, and that the vibe on set was more tense. Less laughter, more stress, less picking, more posturing. The irony? Robbie was supposed to be the patch after Frank, the one who helped hold things together. Instead, he split the fan base. He shifted the tone, and in a way, he became the symbol of everything American pickers used to stand against. It wasn't just about the stuff. It was about the soul behind the stuff. And Mike? Well, it put him in a near-impossible position. He'd already lost Frank, his closest friend and the soul of the show. Bringing in Robbie was a gamble. But when that gamble started costing him trust, connection, and authenticity, Mike didn't push back. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he didn't know how. Or maybe, like a lot of us, he just hoped it would fix itself before things got worse. But it didn't. It only got more complicated. Because here's the thing. If you can't stop your own brother from changing the show's DNA, if you let silence speak louder than action, what does that say about who's really in control? The fans saw it. They felt it. And they started checking out. So now, ask yourself, would you let your brother turn your life's work into something you barely recognize? Because that's exactly what happened to Mike Wolfe. He didn't just lose a co-host. He didn't just lose a friend. He let his little brother take the wheel. And somewhere along the way, the whole show veered off course. And sadly, for Mike, that wasn't the final betrayal. Because of the next ones? They didn't come from family. They came from the suits upstairs. The people who ran the show from behind the curtain. 3. The producers. So, we've already talked about the heartbreak with Frank and the awkward fallout with Robbie. But if you thought family drama was bad, just wait till you hear what was going on behind the camera. Because the next people Mike Wolfe had to deal with weren't co-stars or family. They were the producers, the ones who called the shots, the real power behind American pickers. And let's just say, they knew exactly how to stir the pot. From the very beginning, American Pickers was built to feel real. Like two regular guys just road tripping across the country, finding treasure in old barns, chatting with collectors, and giving forgotten stuff a new life. That unscripted energy was the whole point. Mike Wolfe even said it himself back in a 2012 interview with Script Mag. This show's not about celebrities or scripted fights. It's about real people and real stories. And back then, that was true, at least mostly. But over time, as the show grew in popularity and the pressure to keep ratings high kicked in, things started shifting. Quietly, behind the scenes, the producers began shaping the show more than anyone realized. Here's where it gets interesting. Several former sellers and Reddit insiders have pointed out that many of the deals we saw on TV were actually pre-negotiated long before Mike or Frank showed up. The cameras would roll after the price was already settled. Then the hosts would reenact the whole thing like it was spontaneous. And look, that's not illegal. That's TV. But when your whole brand is built on real picks and real haggling. Faking the drama changes the entire feel. One fan wrote on Reddit, "It felt like watching a play. They were acting like it was happening in the moment, but the sparkle was gone. It didn't feel honest anymore." Another big issue? Manufactured conflict. As the seasons rolled on, producers started leaning into tension, not just between buyers and sellers, but between Mike and his own team.
I'd say
Dirt bike.
75 or
75? I'd do that. I don't think you're too far apart. I'd do 75.
A former crew member even hinted in a behind-the-scenes chat that certain scenes were scripted to create heat between cast members, even when there wasn't any actual drama going on. And think about this. Frank's slow removal from the show? That might not have been Mike's idea. According to the Collider article, production decisions were often made far above the cast's heads. Frank had health issues, sure, but many believe producers used that as an opportunity to shake things up and boost attention. Drama equals views. But here's the twist. Through all of this, Mike Wolfe stayed mostly silent.
I just saved everything, never even went to school to learn to read or write or nothing.
When people started accusing the show of being fake, he publicly defended it. He kept saying the pics were real, the items were real, and the passion was always real. And maybe it was for him. Mike has always been a guy who loved the hunt. His passion for forgotten history and Americana? That's never been in question. But in a show as big as American Pickers, one person's vision isn't always enough to keep things grounded. The show had become a machine. A well-oiled, scripted, drama-leaning reality TV machine. And for the producers, that was exactly the point. They needed stories to move faster. Emotions are set to spike higher. Negotiations are to be tighter and more dramatic. And when things didn't naturally go that way, they didn't wait around. They built it themselves. This brings up a real question. Do you believe reality shows are truly real? Because if American Pickers taught us anything, it's that even shows built on authenticity can get pulled into the entertainment trap. Slowly, quietly, and with just enough editing magic to make it feel real enough. And maybe that's what made this part of the story sting so much for Mike. He built American Pickers on a simple idea. Real people finding real things. But when the people running the show wanted more drama than discovery, even he couldn't stop it. Now picture this. Mike's dealing with Frank's loss and the tension with his brother Robbie. On top of that, he's got a production crew that is turning his passion project into a scripted TV circus. It's enough to make anyone crack. Or, at the very least, go quiet. Because when the people controlling the narrative are more focused on conflict than connection, the heart of the show starts to fade. And next, let's look at the people Mike trusted the most, the loyal staff and crew who were there from the beginning until they weren't. 4. Antique archaeology staff. So far, we've followed the cracks between Mike and Frank, the tension with Robbie, and the pressure from producers. But the next part? This one hit close to home. Literally. Because this time, it wasn't a co-star or someone behind the camera. It was the very people who stood behind his brand, the antique archaeology staff. For years, Mike Wolfe's Nashville store wasn't just a stop on the map, it was the destination for fans. A place that felt like a living museum, part shop, part road trip fantasy. Tourists lined up for photos under that iconic sign, while longtime employees helped bring the picker energy to life in person. But in the summer of 2023, something changed. Without much warning, the Nashville location of antique archaeology closed its doors. Not months in advance, not even with a company-wide announcement. Just 1 week's notice. That was all. Mike posted a sentimental farewell on Instagram, After over a decade, our lease is up, and it's time to move on. Thanks for the memories. The post was soft, nostalgic, and polished. It felt like a goodbye letter to fans, complete with dreamy photos of motorcycles, vintage signs, and his signature Americana aesthetic. But behind that Instagram filter was a very different story. On Reddit, especially in the Nashville threads, former employees and locals started to speak up. One user wrote, "My cousin worked there and didn't find out until a few days before the shutdown. No heads up, just a short meeting, a thank you, and then done." Another commented, "It was so abrupt. People were still scheduled on the calendar when the announcement went public." It's one thing for a business to close. Stores shut down all the time. But the way it happened left people stunned. Some of these staffers had been part of Mike's team for years. They were brand ambassadors, tour guides, part of the face of American Pickers. They helped keep the connection between the show and the fans alive. And they found out through whispers and rushed meetings. Fans noticed the shift, too. One wrote, "I drove 4 hours to visit the shop last summer, and it was empty, just a shell. No, thank you sign. No warning. Felt like they vanished overnight." Others started questioning how much Mike actually valued the team behind the store. Of course, on the surface, the explanation was business. Mike hinted at lease issues and future projects. He teased bigger things on the horizon and asked fans to stay excited. And maybe that was true. But for the employees left without jobs and the fans left without answers, it didn't really matter. The brand they had helped build was shutting its doors, and it felt like no one got to say goodbye properly. This wasn't the first time Mike was accused of leaving people in the dark, but this moment, more than most, shifted how people saw him. Because up until then, Mike Wolfe was still the down-to-earth picker, the guy who never forgot his roots. But when your own staff finds out they're losing their jobs with barely enough time to pack up, that's hard to defend. And maybe the hardest part of all? Mike never directly addressed the backlash. No personal video, no sit-down, thank you to his team, just a photo carousel on social media, and silence. That disconnect between the man on the show and the man behind the business was starting to get louder. So here's the question. Have you ever lost your job without warning? That feeling of being blindsided after giving your energy, your time, and your loyalty? That's what these people experienced. Not because of ratings, not because of a feud, but because of decisions made quietly in the background. Mike may have built a brand on history and preservation, but sometimes what gets left behind isn't just antiques, it's people. 5. History Channel execs. So we've gone through Frank, Robbie, the producers, and even the staff Mike let down. But now, let's talk about the people you never saw on screen. The ones really pulling the strings, quietly, from behind the curtain. At first, Mike Wolfe had full creative control. American Pickers was his baby. He built it from the ground up, traveling from small towns to big barns, finding stories buried in junk. And when the show took off, it looked like Mike was in charge of everything. But slowly, that changed. As the ratings climbed and the show became one of History Channel's biggest hits, the network started stepping in more. Not in big dramatic ways at first, just little things, more structure, more clean edits, more pressure to stick to what worked. Then one day, the decisions didn't go through Mike anymore. Fast forward to 2021. Frank Fritz disappears from new episodes without much explanation. Fans started asking questions. Was it his health? His back surgery? Crohn's disease? Was he coming back? Nope. Frank later revealed he was fired. Not even a proper goodbye. He said Mike didn't reach out. That stung, especially for fans who saw them as brothers. And when Mike finally made a statement, it felt a little Too polished, like a PR move, not a personal one. But here's what many don't know. Mike didn't make the call. According to insiders and reports, it was the executives who wanted Frank gone. They thought he was becoming a liability. Too many health issues, too much risk. So they quietly pushed him out and kept the show rolling, hoping nobody would notice. Then, in 2025, things got even weirder. American Pickers was suddenly put on hold. The History Channel said it was just a hiatus. But fans weren't buying it, especially when reports came out saying Mike had been forced to step back from the show. One article said he was given time to reset. Now, come on, what does that even mean? To most people, it sounded like he got quietly pushed aside, just like Frank. And that's the scary part. Mike Wolfe, the guy who created American Pickers, who lived and breathed it for over a decade, couldn't even control what happened to himself anymore. That's what happens when networks take over. They're not interested in heart, or loyalty, or who started what. They want ratings, clean-cut drama, and a show that follows their formula. Once you're no longer giving them that, they'll swap you out like an old sign in a flea market. It's tough to watch, especially knowing how much this show meant to Mike. He wasn't just clocking in, he loved what he did. Every pick, every dusty attic, every story, it mattered to him. But behind every handshake and promo photo, there were execs pulling strings, deciding who stayed, who left, and what stories made it to air. Now that Mike's called out the 5 people who left the deepest scars, he's finally asking the real question: what was it all for? Mike reflects on the years he gave to the road, the show, and the people who let him down. But what was the lesson that finally changed everything? Final chapter: the road home. For over a decade, American Pickers wasn't just a show. It was Mike Wolfe's entire life. He'd built it from scratch, barn by barn, mile by mile. Long before the History Channel lights and reality show contracts, Mike was just a guy with a van, a camera, and a crazy love for forgotten things. Rusty signs, dusty bikes, old gas pumps, things most folks would toss without a second glance. To Mike, those things had stories, and he saw something in them. He saw himself. But as the show grew and the brand exploded, so did the pressure. First, it was the producers tightening control. Then Robbie stepped in, changing the tone. Then Frank was gone. Then the staff. Then Mike himself was told to take a break. It all happened so fast. And it didn't stop when the cameras cut. In an interview from 2024, long after Frank's stroke, long after the store closures, Mike finally let his guard down. Not on a flashy TV stage, just a small podcast, off the radar. And what he said, it hit harder than any episode ever could. He said, "I lost my best friend. I lost my team. And in some ways, I lost myself in the middle of all this." Mike wasn't crying for attention. He wasn't blaming one person. He was just being honest. And it was the kind of honesty you can't script. Because the truth is, while American Pickers brought fame, success, and a legacy behind the scenes, it took a real toll on his life. He talked about the early days when he and Frank would laugh on the road for hours with no script, no plan, just a couple of friends chasing treasure in the middle of nowhere. Back then, it wasn't about drama or ratings. It was about finding things that mattered, meeting people who had lived full lives, connecting through stories and dust and history. And over time, that magic got replaced by production deadlines, by fake arguments, by business decisions made in boardrooms instead of back roads. Mike admitted he didn't always speak up. That sometimes staying quiet felt easier than pushing back. And that's what hurt him the most. Because every time he looked the other way, when deals were staged, when staff was laid off, when Robbie got too aggressive, or when execs pushed Frank out, he lost a little bit of what made American Pickers real in the first place. In that same interview, he said something that stayed with us. "I was building a brand, but somewhere along the way, I stopped protecting the soul of it." And that's the part that hits, doesn't it? Because we've all been there at a job, a project, a dream that started pure, started real. But somewhere, it turned into something else, something you barely recognize. For Mike, the road was always the heartbeat of the show. It was never about making the most money or being the biggest name on cable. It was about finding beauty in forgotten places. And in the end, that's what he's trying to return to. After his hiatus, Mike stepped back from the spotlight. No big tour, no dramatic announcement, just a quiet shift. More time with his daughter, more time off the grid, less chasing, more being. He's still picking, but now on his own terms. No producers, no staged scenes, just Mike, the way it started. His final lesson? It wasn't about who betrayed him or who hurt him most. It was about why he let it happen. He said, "I kept saying yes to keep everything running, but sometimes the most important thing you can do is walk away." That's something you don't hear often, especially not from someone who built a hit show that lasted over 20 seasons. But that's why this chapter matters. Because this one isn't about antiques or ratings or even American Pickers anymore. It's about choosing peace over pressure. It's about learning when to fight and when to finally let go. And for anyone out there who's ever chased a dream, only to find themselves somewhere they never meant to end up, Mike's story might sound a little too familiar. So here's the takeaway. Not every goodbye is a failure. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. The road gave me everything, and eventually, it taught me how to stop driving. Mike Wolfe. Thanks for sticking with us through the twists, truths, and quiet heartbreak behind American Pickers. Let us know in the comments who you think really let Mike down the most.